Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Joe. He's Nick. And you are entering into the combat zone, where the enemy has only one of four things to say: bail out, abandon ship, and we surrender. There's one more thing. I totally forgot it. Take cover. Take cover, and we surrender. And you are coming live from, we are live tonight from Bunker B.
I try every week.
Somewhere in the nation's capital. And the reason we don't disclose that location, ladies and gentlemen, is for our safety, but it's also for your safety. Because if we are not on the air, where else are you going to learn the truth about current affairs, the news, all from a conservative perspective? Okay, there you go. So how is that?
That wasn't bad.
Not bad. I haven't coughed yet, you know. My doctor has put me on this new medication, okay? And the side effect of this new medication is that I have this nasal congestion all the time.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you were dyslexic.
No, I'm not. No, I'm only dyslexic when I type.
Oh, okay.
I find that my fingers start going so fast that
because it's abandon ship, bailout, take cover, we surrender.
Well, there's no particular order to that.
All right. Well, let's dive into. We try to keep a mixed bag here because there's so many things to talk about. We could spend just 2 hours on Lavaland. That thing has legs. Like if Trudeau thought that this budget that he brought down today, and he did actually bring down a budget, it was nothing but a grab bag of goodies for the election. They're trying to get people to change the channel, and it blew up in their face. Anyway, well, I was going somewhere with that. Oh, yeah, some of the nonsense surrounding this is what Trudeau's done is the Tories are going to keep them in the House voting all night long. So Trudeau went out and at your expense bought some cots and pillows, about 20 to 25 of them. Pierre Poliver did a little video. It's only about a buck and a half long. If you watch it, you can see these 2 rows of bunks with pillows on them. And he says this is where they're going to come and rest when they get tired, because we know the Liberals, they're going to get weary and they want to put this behind us and they're going to try to outlast us. My suggestion is just have your staffers from the Tory side fill the cots so the Liberals can't use them, and then make them stay up all night anyway. But it's just, this is like the Keystone Cops. It's ridiculous.
Well, it's a Keystone. Listen, it's a Keystone Cops thing for everybody. I'm not really sure what this accomplishes, keeping the House voting all night. But look, if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But, Andrew Scheer was talking about emergency measures that he wanted to implement. So, good for him. And I just don't know what's going on here. So,
but as far as the budget is concerned, there was a couple of things in it designed to deflect attention. One is pharma-care. The other one is this new homeowners idea, helping young people, move from mom and dad's basement out into their own home. Okay. So what, in a nutshell, from what I understood today, because like everybody else, I was listening and trying to pay attention to get my head around this, that you're going to be able to borrow, if I have this right, and I'm certainly open to be corrected, but CMHC, you're going to be able to get a no-interest loan for somewhere between 3 and 5% of the amount of money that you want to get. So it'll help you come up with your down payment. That's great at 1.92, 2.5% interest rates. But interest rates have a really bad habit. They don't stay down. Now, we've been really fortunate that we've had low interest rates. It's got to be pushing 10 years by now. But every day that goes by, it gets closer to the day they start to rise, and rise more than just a little bit. Remember, it wasn't all that long ago, still within living memory, that interest rates were 22%. That was back in the 80s. So it's not all that far in our past. Could it come back to haunt us again? Well, maybe. I don't want it to. Who wants to pay 22% interest? But think about this. What if the interest rates are, let's say you get a mortgage for 2.99% or 3 or 4%, whatever the going rate is. And all of a sudden, over the next course, over the term of the mortgage, the 5 years, it doubles. It goes from, let's say it's 4, and it goes to 8. Now you can't afford your house anymore because you can't afford the new payments are too much. If you had to borrow that money from CMHC in the first place, which they don't take back until you sell the house, okay, that's fine. But the problem is, if interest rates go up, you're screwed. Because where are you going to get the extra 4% income to be able to pay the mortgage? You still have all the other bills. All of those are going to rise due to inflation. So they're not helping. They're really the best thing when it comes to a housing market, from what I can understand, is let contractors and let people who get into real estate build more houses. And that will bring the price down because the supply will begin to catch up to demand and prices will come down. It's like anything else. If you've got one steering wheel for a 67 Pontiac and everybody wants it, then you can charge pretty much what you want for it. But if you've got 1,000 steering wheels for a 67 Pontiac and nobody wants it, they're going to be dirt cheap. I'm using a very simple analogy, but the point I'm trying to make is this is no different from the point of view of supply and demand. It's supply and demand self-regulate themselves. If people can't afford it, they'll stop buying it. If they stop buying it, there becomes a surplus, and the surplus drives the price down. So this is the part, when you look at the budget, you think, okay, unless you have a 6-month mindset where you only care about things that are going to affect you in the next 6 months. And most people, when they buy a house, look out 20, 25, 30 years because that's how long it normally takes to pay off a mortgage.
Right.
So this is just a bad idea.
So here's the problem from a straightforward, basic economic point of view. Okay, if you increase the demand by making it easier for people to buy houses, and by the way, I get it. I want to see people buying their houses. I want to see young people getting into the housing market.
Yeah, so do I.
I get all of that. Okay, so we want to make it as easy as possible. But the problem is that if you're going to have programs that are going to make it easier, as opposed to just letting market forces dictate how things are, then what's going to happen is you're going to have prices going up. So the net effect of allowing younger people to get into the housing market, okay, changing the rules to manipulate the market. And again, I'm all for younger people getting into the housing market. Don't get me wrong. And absent other factors, why not have 30-year or 35-year or even 40-year mortgages? Okay? But the issue is you have to understand that this will have the effect of pushing prices higher because there's going to be a higher demand for housing. So the net effect may end up being that you don't have younger people getting into the market or not into the market in the numbers that you're expecting. So this is it's a serious problem. And obviously the issue is whatever you're doing, once the government starts interfering with the free market, Nick, then whatever it does, both positively and negatively, is going to have an impact on the free market because the free market continues to operate irrespective of what the government does. The government can only influence the free market. And whatever the government does in terms of programming or policy, okay, that's going to have an impact on the market. So here's making mortgages easier for younger people to afford, okay, is good policy. It's good policy. But because you're interfering in the housing market to begin with, okay, the effect here is that you have the prices stabilized right now with the mortgage program the way it was previously, okay? And now you change it so that you have a higher demand, and that's going to drive prices up.
Yeah, and that's
so it's not rocket science. This is basic economics.
Yeah, and that's why I can't figure out with somebody who is now what you think of him is besides the point. But Morneau, our Minister of Finance, is not a dumb man. He's been around money all his life and made a ton of it. And I don't begrudge him that. But at the same time, either he's completely ignorant of what it takes to put, for somebody struggling to get by on, let's say, $30,000 or $40,000 a year, to try to come up with, what's the median average for a home in Canada now? $300,000, $400,000?
I don't know.
Well, it's in that ballpark, okay? So if you got to come up with $350,000, you got to have $35,000 down at least. Where's that going to come from? How are people?
Well, this is it. You have to, in the final analysis, Nick, you have to allow people, you have to encourage people to save. And you know, all we're doing here is we're increasing the amount of time that they can amortize the mortgage. That's not necessarily a bad thing because it will lower monthly mortgage payments. And then people, remember, when you're paying a mortgage, you're gaining equity, so that's a form of saving. So again, I have to say, I think that this is good policy, but it's good policy in isolation from everything else. And the question is, you know, I have a friend, I'm not going to say who his name is, but, you know, whenever over the years we've talked about policy and what the right policy should be, you know, he's always jumped on me and said that what we're asking the wrong question. The question is not what should the right policy be. The question that you should be asking is whether we should have a policy at all.
Uh-huh.
And in this case, I don't think we should have a policy. I don't think that it's the role of the government to ensure mortgages, whether we're talking 25 years or 30 years or 40 years or 50 years. I don't think, and this is what the government does.
Right.
The whole idea here is banks decide whatever their rules are going to be. Okay, not a problem. But the federal government, the mortgage program, the federal government insures those mortgages.
Well,
so what ends up happening is, you know, because they're insuring it, it's virtually no risk to the banks, and so they give out these mortgages.
Well, we saw this happen in the States under Bill Clinton when he reorganized Freddie Mae and whatever their two major lending institutions are down there. They're people's names, Freddie Mae and
Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
That's it. I always get them confused. Anyway, they lowered the amount that people had to have for down payments. They had to, you know, they were making it easier for people who otherwise would not qualify under more rigid standards to qualify to buy a house. Well, when that bubble burst, there was a huge disaster in the United States. Now, I'm not saying this is going to lead to that kind of a collapse. I mean, there was a time when you could go to Florida and buy a really nice piece of property for pennies on the dollar because nobody could afford to buy them. So a lot of people came down and a bunch of sharks got in the water down there and made some investments, and now it's all rebounding. But they went through a tremendous amount of pain because they messed around with good banking principles that make sure that only the people who can actually repay a loan actually get one. And this is what you see a tendency towards that in this. Now, the other thing that they bring up was pharma-care. Now, I don't have the details in front of me, but any idea, any move towards pharma-care, where it be, you know, a discount on drugs or however way they want to frame it, is a bad idea. And this is not only because it's, you know, it's more, we walk down the path of socialized medicine again, but we also have government being at its worst. It's inefficient. It doesn't spend your money very well, certainly no better than anything you would ever do with it. And you're not allowed you don't have the option to go and shop around to get the best deal. It's whatever the government wants you to get. And it doesn't sound like it'll start out that way, but look at our healthcare system. That's certainly the way it ends up. So I don't think this is a plan designed to throw water on the Lavalin affair. This is a plan designed to give the Liberal candidates on the stumps and the hustings this fall something to talk about other than having to defend the SNC scandal. That's all that this is about. They're not interested in balancing the budget. They're not interested in good fiscal policy. They just want to get reelected. And that's what this whole budget is about. And if they think this has turned the page on this scandal, are they ever in for a shock?
Well, we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. But I will say this. We've been talking about mortgages, but you mentioned also pharma-care, the idea of a universal payment type of system.
Right.
Again, the problem with that is that if the federal government is paying for drugs, then look, I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase this. The principle is this, okay? It's the same thing with free health care,
right?
Or ostensibly free health care. When you separate the consumer, and remember that patients are consumers of health care.
That's right.
And in this case, they would be consumers of drugs. When you separate the consumer from the cost of their consumption, you drive the demand up. And unless you can keep up with the demand, okay, you're going to drive the prices up. And this is the problem. The problem is that the only way that you can keep the prices under control, and I use the term under control really advisedly here, okay, because what does it mean to keep the prices under control? I mean, the fact is that certain people are going to be able to afford. So people who have more money are going to be able to afford more. People who have less money are going to be able to afford less. If there's a way that we can help people who are at the lower end of the income scale, who have trouble making ends meet, then that's fine. That's something to look at. But this idea of a universal pharma-care program it's absurd, and it starts out with this with a nice idea that we want to help people. Okay, don't get me wrong; it's a lovely idea. We want to help people. Okay, great. But Bill Gates, and I know Bill Gates isn't a Canadian, but Kevin O'Leary doesn't need help paying his drugs. He frankly doesn't need help paying his medical bills, and I don't know for sure, but it wouldn't surprise me to learn that Kevin O'Leary doesn't even see doctors in Canada. So, but this is the thing: is all this is going to do is it's going to drive the costs up, and of course the consumers, okay, the guy in the street doesn't see those costs going up because we're not passing the costs of these programs to him through
directly.
Taxes. What we're doing is we're passing the cost of these programs on to future generations. If we were taxing people at the level that the government is spending, we could very easily have a revolution in this country.
Oh, no kidding.
Especially in Ontario.
Well, here's another little thing that Trudeau has to be thinking about right now is he's lost another minister, or not a minister, but an MP. Selena Caesar Chavenes, I think is how you say her name, was a Liberal MP who will now be sitting as an independent. She's had enough of this and has said, I don't want any more part of this, and has walked out the door and is no longer a member of the Liberal Party. She's not even out of the caucus. She's completely out of the party. She's an independent now. So all these things are stones in his boat. And sooner or later, you can only throw so many stones in a boat before it sinks. And this is just one thing to add on top. So, or something else to add on top. So he's lost 3 notable ladies, not just anybody, but notable ladies. He's lost an Indigenous woman, he's lost a black woman, and he's lost, I think, 2 black women, now that I think about it. And this is supposed to be the feminist prime minister. Somebody who's all about fairness and equal representation and all this stuff. And yet these women, and the only reason I mention their color is because it's an issue in this case, is, rather than embracing them, he flips his finger to them and says, well, if you don't like it, hit the road. That's not the way he presents himself. He's supposed to be the soft, compassionate, feminist prime minister. And every time he turns around, whether it's the Grope Gate or whether it's the way he's dealt with SNC, shutting down Jody Wilson-Raybould, to losing 2 more people out of his caucus and one of them out of his party, These are not the actions of a man who cares and has feelings for the plight of women. He's using them like puppets, and if they don't want to play along, then they can go and sit somewhere else. And I think that's just incredible to be able to have to say that.
Yeah, I don't know. In fairness to the Prime Minister, I don't know what the dynamics are right now. It's obviously it has to be troubling for him and then his allies. But I don't know. I think we have to be cautious. I think we have to not immediately decide that we know all of the details and the inner machinations and all of that stuff that's going on internally, whatever discussions have been had or not had. People make decisions for their own reasons, and so that's all. I'm just saying, let's not jump to conclusions. Let's not assume that it's because Justin Trudeau has groped anybody or regroped people. He
certainly did do that. I'm not making that up, and I think everybody is familiar with that female reporter out of the West Coast, BC, someplace. And his excuse was, well, she didn't experience it the same way I did, as if that matters. Anyway, so there's those are issues I thought were relevant out of this whole thing. And again, it's all designed to deflect attention away from this scandal that simply will not die.
Now, okay, so here's my question. Okay, so what is your view, or what are people's views of how the Conservatives are handling this right now? Because when he was presenting, when the finance minister went to present his budget speech last week, they basically all shouted him down and etc. Eventually, he went ahead and did give the speech. But what do you think of that?
Well, there's a certain amount of I get it on a certain level, because on one hand, there's a certain amount of symbolism that matters. Resisting, even though you're going to lose because they have the majority, showing Canadians that you just didn't roll over and that you did your best with what little you had to work with. There's that. But at the end of the day, you have to look at what you're doing and say, all right, what real difference can we make here? And is this the best path? Like this idea of filibustering all night. Well, again, it falls under the symbol, because it's not going to change anything. You're not going to stop them from doing this. So I would rather see the Tories, and from what I've seen on Facebook, a lot of people like what the Tories are doing. I just don't know how much legs that has. I think I would rather see the Tories come out and say, okay, look, SNC-Lavalin is a big deal, and here's how we will make sure these are the policies we will put in place or whatever, come up with a plan to make sure that they separate or put more checks and balances in, if we need them, between the Prime Minister and the Attorney General, so that he can't just pick up the phone and say, let this guy go. Okay, I would rather see that. It's the same thing with climate. It's the same thing with a lot of stuff. Yes, it's fine to rail from the opposite benches about what did he know and when did he know it. But if you're going after them on a particular topic and you don't have anything to offer that's better than what they have, sooner or later that wears out. And people say, well, you know what? Because I heard Justin Trudeau say the other day, and I never agree with him. I think the man is a pompous bozo. But he did ask what I thought was a valid question. He said, okay, you don't like our plan, because he wasn't giving them an answer on carbon tax. He said, what's yours? You've had 276 days to tell us what your plan is. And I think that was a very valid question. And, of course, they don't have a plan. Well, don't you think it would make sense to come back to him and say, well, here's what we would do? So
are you saying the Conservatives don't have a plan?
That there has been none brought forward that I know of.
Yeah. Well, you see, my attitude, as you know, Nick, is to keep it very simple, right? If I was running the show, my plan would be very simple: clean air, clean water, clean land.
Fine.
There it is. I don't have to forget about throwing billions of dollars at some sort of an ephemeral chase to to try to slow down or stop carbon tax. Look, in the final analysis, we want to serve people. We want to serve real people. And in a practical way, what does that mean? That means making sure that they have clean water, clean air, and clean land. And if you're doing that, then frankly, everything else will take care of itself. This whole idea of, we've talked about this, and I don't know if I want to get into it too deeply, but the whole notion of carbon dioxide as a pollutant is so absurdly ridiculous. It's staggering. It's I can't find the words that adequately describe to me how surprising it is that people just buy into that hook, line, and sinker. It's such utter nonsense. I could probably figure out, open up a dictionary and start looking for the right words to use to describe it. I don't know. What can I say, right?
I think you're right, though, that all they have to do is say that. Give back 3 points. Say, here's what we would concentrate on: clean air, clean water, clean land.
Right. I mean, the reality is, if you look at the number of boil water advisories in communities across this country, particularly Aboriginal communities, there's something criminal, borderline criminal, that we would be spending any money on subsidizing environmental protection in Ethiopia or in Sudan. These countries are not contributing to the problems, and in the final analysis, we have to be providing care for the people who are paying taxes right here, or who are living under our jurisdiction. There's something fundamentally wrong with a climate change accord, the Paris Climate Change Accord, where we're contributing, again, billions of dollars in supporting this nonsensical idea that we're going to stop the climate from changing because it's our fault that it's changing in the first place, okay? Right. And in the meantime, we have real people, mothers, children, who don't have access for weeks and months at a time every year. This is not a small, isolated thing. This happens in dozens of places every single year.
Yeah,
okay, we don't have the money to go in and provide them with proper, clean drinking water. I know people are going to criticize me. And they're going to go, well, what do you want to do? You want to have you want the federal government now to go in and do all of these things in different communities? I don't know. I'm not suggesting an answer here. I'm just saying that it's perverted. It's that our sense of priority and our sense of decency has become inverted.
Well, even if we did have the money to give to Ethiopia, even if we did that kind of stuff, why is it all of a sudden our problem? Like, we have enough problems at home, and we should take care of home first. Then we can look to the rest of the world. Okay, we're over time. We need to take a bit of a break, so we're just going to catch our breath. I think that Nick and I have to cough a little bit to clear our throats. Boy, oh boy. It's been a rough half an hour. Anyway, stay put, guys. We'll be back in a few minutes here in the Combat Zone. Zone, folks. Shifting gears a little bit. I'm Nick. He's Joseph, and we are the hosts of the show. And I wanted to.
That's shifting gears?
I'm double clutching. And for those who've never driven a manual transmission, you have no idea what that means. You push the clutch in once they get out of gear. How about gear braking? What's that?
Gear braking.
Gear braking, that you do on the downside when you're slowing down. That's when you use the engine's compression to slow you down instead of using your brakes. Anyway, who cares? All right, but what I did want to do is change topic a little bit. I mean, we could go on and on and on about SNC, and I have a feeling, I really honestly believe this is going to haunt them until they let Jody Wilson-Raybould speak. All right, but we could go on about that for hours. I do want to bring a fresh topic to the table, something that we haven't talked about recently, or it's new in the news today, is that there is a strike by students of post-secondary education across the province. They're protesting Ford's changes to Premier Ford here in Ontario. He's changed the way funding is done for students and for universities, and they don't like it, and they're mad because now they have to pay for more things themselves. And I think they're I'm being callous, but you know what? That to me is a sign of an ingrate, somebody who is entitled to their entitlements. Look, the fact that Ontario pays for a good chunk of people's education by subsidizing universities is a gift that the taxpayer gives the students. And yes, you have OSPCA, and yes, they're supposed to pay it back. And that makes it possible for a lot of people to go to school who otherwise might not have. But here's a little news flash for a lot of people. Going to post-secondary isn't always for everybody. As much as you listen to the mainstream media, you would think that if you don't go to post-secondary, you're a nobody. You can't do anything. You're not smart. You're not educated. And yet some of the most successful people I know a guy who lives in Pembroke, runs a very successful operation there, heavy equipment, farming, logging, all kinds of different things, with a grade 3 education. The man can barely write, and yet he's hugely successful, has a handful of employees, looks after thousands of acres. I mean, this guy knows his business. He's self-taught. So it doesn't necessarily, and he's only one of millions of examples across this country of people who didn't need post-secondary to show them how to be successful. They just decided they weren't going to let anybody else tell them they couldn't be and went out and did it. So when you have this kind of a protest, and I will, just full disclosure, I've got, I think there's been 4 of our family go through Algonquin, and yes, they took part in OSPCA, OSAP, I should say. They have taken advantage of that, but they're paying it back. And it's a situation where I'm grumbling about a system that my family is taking advantage of. That doesn't mean I like it. That what I would rather do, you want to bring the cost of education down, cut the funding altogether, and start getting rid of courses universities don't absolutely have to have. Start attracting people into the STEM courses. Start attracting people at colleges into the trades. We have there is a glut of jobs available in the trades. I have an 18-year-old son who is just ready to step out into the work world, and he'll go out this summer, and he wants to work for a landscaper first. And I'm glad to see it because they're going to kick his butt all over the place. They'll put some meat on his bones and make him tough. But the point I'm trying to make is that if you have a glut of opportunities like that, you can go to a college for a fraction of the price of university. He can get his heavy equipment operator, run a hi-ho bulldozer, those kinds of things. Those guys make good money, and they're crying for people.
Right. So you're touching on a few different items that I want to just address. The first is, you're right. We have in this country a serious skilled labor shortage. So and everything sort of ties together. But let's take that from the starting point. And of course, this is something that the finance minister talked about in his budget as well. The need to invest money. I hate that term every time I hear the government talk about investing money, okay? Because
it makes me nervous.
Government doesn't really invest money, it spends it, okay? So there is a difference. But the government wants to put money into, whether you characterize it as spending or investment, into skills training, and more money into skills training. And this is something that the provincial governments across the country have been dealing with, as have various unions, frankly,
yep.
and other trade associations. So this is a serious problem. We're not educating, we're not providing people the skills to enter the workforce in a way that is consistent with the workforce. But I maintain that this is largely because of the interference of the government. Again, somebody once said that the road to hell is paved with the best of intentions.
Yep.
So we have great intentions. We want to help people with their education. So what do? We start to subsidize it. We start to pay for post-secondary education. We're paying for the universities. We're paying for building infrastructure in universities, capital expenses, and that. And universities, of course, go out and raise money through contributions for this kind of thing. But still, taxpayers heavily subsidize the capital expenditures of universities.
Yep.
We subsidize tuitions in various ways. And here's how it ties back into what we were talking about in the previous segment, Nick. Okay. You are shielding the consumers, and again, because students are consumers of education services, you shield them from the real costs of their education, and all you do is you create a higher and higher and higher demand, and the higher the demand with limited resources, relatively limited resources, the cost of providing that service escalates. It just inflates.
Yep.
And so you're absolutely right. It's a little counterintuitive, but the way that you have to keep costs under control is not through controlling the costs, and it's certainly not through subsidizing the spending or helping people afford the costs, except for in dire circumstances, okay? The way you deal with it is you allow consumers to have to deal with the real costs of their consumption, and then the market regulates itself. And invariably, that would mean that the cost for universities would go down. So as long as as long as universities can depend on the government subsidizing the tuition of their students, there's no incentive for universities to save money. And you can have laws and regulations and incentives from a policy, a government point of view, to encourage this kind of thing. But nothing works as effectively as the free market.
Well, this also ties in. You made an interesting point about how, how did I say it? That if we made them pay the full freight for their education. And I thought, something, that's exactly the same kind of lingo you hear when we're talking about the environment, how people have to pay the full freight for their consumerism, right? The companies have to be made to pay for their packaging. They have to be made for the cost of pollution. All right, now, that's not the same topic, but the lingo is amazingly similar. I would much rather see somebody have to pay the full freight for their education rather than this other stuff about the environment, because, first of all, that doesn't make any sense. But if you think about this, when you have to pay a heavy price for something, you appreciate it a lot more. If it costs you, let's say you have to save for 2 or 3 years to go to university or college. When you get there, are you going to spend your first semester partying and drinking and carrying on? No, you're going to do what my wife did. You're going to buckle down, you're going to take it seriously, and day one, you're going to have your notebook open, pen in hand, bright and cheery, ready to go, 8 o'clock in the morning. And you won't have time for that kind of nonsense, because what you're trying to get is maximum value out of your hard-earned money. And this is something that has been lost on us. We think that because the government pays for it, there's no value to it. Therefore, why do I have to worry about it? I can take a semester off and still pass.
Right. Okay. Now, here's the other thing, all right, that you touched on, Nick, and now we're going to get ourselves into real trouble, okay? but let's not beat around the bush, okay? Let's be daring, okay? Let's be opinion leaders rather than just opinion takers.
Okay.
I say that far too many people today go to university. It's the thing to do. And people are graduating with all kinds of degrees that there's no market for, okay? And the question is, should everybody be going to university in the first place? And I don't begrudge people going to university, but there's a lot of liberal arts degrees out there and graduates that go to university, they get their BA. And there's no work for them Because, how many teachers can you have? How many people? I mean, what is the skill set that with a simple BA, in English, okay, in English literature or French literature or fine arts or whatever. I'm not against these degrees. I'm just asking, what exactly are you going to do with them if you're not going to teach, or you're not going to do some sort of research or whatever, or you're not going to work in a museum? And so the result is that you get a lot of people who are graduating with degrees that they can't use in the workplace. And so what do? Well, they go on to get their master's degree, and in many cases they go on to get their PhD. Or they end up working in some administrative capacity of the public service or whatever, okay? So again, this is the result of us wanting to push people into post-secondary education, particularly university. And more colleges are more and more, as they chase after that subsidized tuition buck,
right,
are offering programs that are not necessarily that marketable either.
Well, look, I don't have any problem with people going back to university or college, or to university or college. Let's face it, how many people want a doctor who hasn't been there, or a dentist, or an ophthalmologist? There are certain trades that require it.
Let me challenge that, okay, Nick? Let me tell you something, okay? Obviously, if you're an ophthalmologist, you've gone through university, but there was a time when the best ophthalmologists in the world didn't go to university, and there are still jurisdictions in the world where, take for instance, a lawyer, okay? I know people are going to go, oh, lawyers, why are we defending lawyers? Well, I happen to think that the law is a very decent and honorable profession. I know that there are a lot of people who maybe are charlatans in the business, but that's kind of the way it probably is in every industry and every profession. They're not
unique. It's just...
But why do you have to go to university to practice law? In fact, there are jurisdictions where you can still get a law degree, become a lawyer, okay, simply through apprenticeship. And there's lots of things. So I ask you this, okay, seriously, without denigrating or suggesting that we shouldn't have university medical schools. I'm not suggesting that, so no one should misrepresent what I'm saying here, okay? Or dental schools or optometrist schools or anything like that.
That was the word I wanted, actually.
But let me ask you honestly, okay, if your doctor is well trained through a real apprenticeship, and we think about apprentices just in terms of the trades, okay, but what is a doctor? What is medicine if not a trade in a certain way? Well, so why do I care? Why do I care what university my doctor went to? I just care that my doctor knows what he's doing. Now, maybe it's hard to figure out whether the doctor knows what he's doing if he doesn't have a medical degree. So we're trying to have some sort of standardization of credentials, because that's how we judge systemically. That's how we judge and fit people into a particular category, for better or for worse.
Well, I think my point was that there are certain degrees that require, or certain occupations that require a university degree, and I'm not knocking those. And if you can get away, look.
But I don't think I'm sorry, Nick, I don't think. I hear what you're saying, but I'm just telling you, I don't think. And I look, we're treading on dangerous water here, for sure, okay? Dangerous ground, I should say. But I don't know. I don't know that there are many things that you really have to go to university for. Today, the way we have the system set up, okay, that's where people learn these things, okay? But are they learning them better because they're learning in a classroom? Or I don't know. But in principle, I'm not that convinced that the best way to train a doctor or to train an engineer or to train a lawyer is through university, when you can have precisely the same kind of academic study in more of a hands-on apprenticeship guided
sort of thing. That. The doctors do that. That's what interns are. They apprentice in a hospital. They run them through the ringer. There's the stories about interns are legion. I think that maybe in a way that's already being done for doctors. For lawyers, I don't necessarily think that is. If you ever watch the show Suits, now it's a work of fiction, okay, but it's about a young kid, really, really bright, and he ends up working for one of the biggest law firms in New York. One of the younger, middle-aged lawyers really likes him, sees a lot of himself, and he hires him knowing the kid's never been to Harvard, and the only place these guys hire from is Harvard. And the whole
he doesn't even have a degree in law. He doesn't have anything.
All he does is have a photographic memory.
Right.
And he can remember stuff and draw case files up, and so they hire him on as essential for all intents and purposes as an apprentice. And as the show progresses, they go through all the challenges of trying to hide the secret, blah, blah, blah. But while that's a work of fiction, I don't necessarily have a problem with somebody learning like that in the case of, I guess where I come down on it is when the degree centers around life and death. Like, I don't want a thoracic surgeon that hasn't been properly trained in a school of medicine. Okay, that's just...
But you're only saying that because your mind is programmed to think that the way that this guy gets his training in thoracic medicine is in university, in the classroom. And what I'm saying is that's the system we've created, but you could have an equal kind of training outside of the classroom without a university setting where you're taking somebody who wants to study medicine, who wants to be a thoracic surgeon, who is working with and it's a classic apprenticeship program. I know when we talk about apprenticing, we always think in terms of trades, but that's because that's the way that we've been programmed to think about them. So again, I'm not advocating for eliminating universities, okay, but I'm challenging the notion that there's only one way to think about this, that if we didn't have universities, we wouldn't have the way that we have them now with classrooms and lecturers and stuff like that, that we wouldn't have doctors. Of course we would have doctors. It would be the learning and training environment would be different, but it would be, in its own way, just as effective, if not more effective.
So I will confess I'd never given that much thought because, like I said before, I want somebody who knows exactly what they're doing when they're holding a knife over my heart. So, and if that can be really, when you get down to it, you're right. Does it really matter? As long as the guy is qualified, that he knows what he's doing, has a record of success, and is competent, and his team has faith in his ability, and I have faith in his ability, then the rest of it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, he's going to stitch you up, either dead or alive, and I prefer the alive version. All right, but as far as universities in general go, a lot of them have turned into breeding grounds for some very dangerous thought. And I hate to keep citing him, but Jordan Peterson makes this case brilliantly over and over again. And if you watch any of his videos, it doesn't take long to come across that attitude. And it's just, this is why I'm not sure I would if my kids wanted to go to university now, the University of Somewhereville, okay, it doesn't matter where. If they want to go into the humanities, I'm not paying for it. I would not help them. I'm not saying they can't go, but they're going to pay for it on their own, because it's such a dangerous place for a young and impressionable mind, and you can't tell me that at 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, those minds are not young and impressionable. That's when they are the most young and impressionable. That's when you can really put a thumbprint on a kid at that age, because they have all the enthusiasm and energy of youth without the experience that history brings, or the experience that life brings. And I really like to think that's what Churchill meant when he said, if you're not a socialist when you're young, you haven't got a heart, and if you're not a conservative when you're older, you haven't got a head. Conservatism is just socialism that's seen enough of the world to know what works and what doesn't, and to live by that.
Yeah, in a large sense, you're you're not wrong, Nick. That's and I always told my kids and still tell them, even though they're all adults now, when the occasion rises where I get to offer them my pearls of wisdom or whatever you want to call my sage advice. I like to think it's sage advice and pearls of wisdom or whatever. But I do tell them, I said, look, you have to deal with the real world the way it really is.
That's right.
That's it. Simple. It's just simple advice. So there you have it. But on the thing, just to sort of wrap up the discussion about universities and that, I think that the bigger problem, the bigger question is we've talked about doctors and lawyers and the quality of education, but really, should everybody be going to university? I think that there's a lot of people who are in university that ought not to be there. I'm not an elitist, but maybe in a sense I am. I think that people who go to university, that there should be fewer university programs, and I think that the people who go ought to be, the creme de la creme. And I know that there are people who are going to hate what I'm saying about this, okay? But I think that it should be available to people, but I just don't believe that in this notion that everybody should graduate high school and go to university.
I think that they should
go. I think that they should go to college and learn a trade. And I'd even go even further than that. I don't know that everybody should go to college. Certainly, I don't see why you should have to go to college to learn a trade. Well, a hands-on thing like that. I think that what we need to do is we need to scale back our whole post-secondary industry. I think that we have to eliminate subsidies so that people have to work to be able to afford their tuition. The parents have to start to save for their kids' post-secondary education, which a lot of parents don't do these days because they know they don't have to save because of the subsidies.
Well, and it's a lot harder to save now when there's so much money going out the door in taxes.
Right.
I will make this comment as we close out. When I first decided I was going to be a truck driver, I didn't wake up one morning and say, oh, wow, there's my future, a truck driver. I was looking for a job, any job, because I had a family to feed. And I walked into a little trucking company called Nussey's Cartage down in Tilbury, not far from Windsor, and I asked if they had any work. And the guy said, well, we need a shunt driver, which is just a guy who drives around town moving empty trailers in and out of bays. And I spent the first 8 months going backwards. By the time I was done there, I could back around the corner blindfolded in the dark in a snowstorm because that's all I'd done. And when you're in your early 30s, you still have a little bit of energy and so on. I dropped 20 pounds, and I was probably as fit as I'd been since I got out of the military. But the point I'm making is there are all kinds of truck driving schools out there. And you can pay $10,000 to get your driver's license to drive a tractor trailer. Or you can find a guy like Nussey Cartage who was willing to take a risk on a kid who didn't know anything about how to, about a Mack with a 350 engine in it and a 10-speed transmission. Okay, but by the time I was done, I had gotten my license. I moved on to a place in Brampton, and I started my over-the-road career, which lasted 10 years, 3 of which I owned my own truck. Not one day did I spend in the classroom other than to write the exam for my ticket. And that was it. So you can do things without having to go to these post-secondary schools. And would it have been any different if I'd have gone to a construction company and say, hey, man, I'd love to learn how to drive a bulldozer? I mean, they are a very powerful machine, but how complicated are they? Especially if you're willing to take the time to learn to do it right. So, all right, looks like we're time to take a break. So it's the top of the hour. We're going to take a little rest here and kind of refresh. We'll come back on the other side with more. So stick around. We'll be back on the Combat Zone right after this.
Okay, we're back in the combat zone, or you're back in the combat zone. We never left. I'm Joe, he's Nick, and we're coming to you from Bunker B here in the nation's capital, undisclosed location, and I think we're wearing that joke out. So this might be the last time that I raise the issue at all.
Oh, well, don't do that. We could put in the 2 pillboxes in the front in next week.
Oh, pillboxes.
You can't just waltz in here, you know.
Are you talking about the pillbox, like the real pillbox, or the pillbox hat? The pillbox hat.
No, the pillbox with the gun sticking out.
Okay, yeah, no, I knew that, Nick. I knew that. So listen, talking about pillboxes and guns and all of that stuff, okay? Here's a topic that we have not talked about before, Nick, that is super controversial, but I think it's really relevant because, you know, we're hearing more and more and more about the rise of nationalism, in particular the rise of white nationalism in Western countries, in the United States and Canada. Last week, this horrific shooting in New Zealand,
right?
Massacre of
there was 48 people injured and some killed.
50. There were 50 some people killed.
Was there?
It was a large number.
Okay.
So anyway, so there's the rise of nationalism, and people are talking about this, and in particular the rise of white nationalism. And it seems that, you know, every time that there's somebody that does something, people are getting super concerned about this. I think you were telling me earlier that the Anti-Defamation League in the United States had issued a report where they were raising the alarm about the rise of white nationalism. And I think what it was that they were saying that 48 or 49 out of the 50 quote-unquote extremist shootings in the United States last year were white nationalist motivated.
Right.
And of course, you know, they're sounding the alarm bell over this. And so my response to that is, first of all, I don't really know how you define white nationalism and extremist shootings. Okay, how you differentiate one from the other. I'm sure that the guys at the ADL have come up with some kind of metric to make that category, but I don't know what it is. But 49 out of 50 shootings. Now tell me, Nick, because I know you looked this up earlier.
I did.
So how many? Give us an idea of how many. 50. Wait a minute. 50 shootings. 50 shootings?
Uh-huh.
I mean, the city of Chicago. Well, give us some of the numbers that you were able to find.
Okay. So you remember that 48 out of 50 is 98%, right? That's where they draw their 98% conclusion from.
Right. Was it 48 out of 50
Yes.
or 49 out of 50? Because that's 98% would be 49 out of 50.
Okay, we'll give them the extra one. Just looking at Statista, the statistical portal, total number of murders in the United States in 2017 by state. Now, this is as recent information as we can get, all right? In the state of California alone, 1,830 murders. Now, when you juxtapose that over 50 attempts, 50 shootings, that doesn't mean everybody who was shot died. It just means there were shootings.
Right, and in fairness, not everybody that was murdered was shot.
Okay, but the point I'm trying to make is...
It gives you a sense of proportion.
Precisely.
Right.
Like, it's like somebody, and I use this example a lot, it's like somebody running into the room screaming 42.
So, is there, you've got a computer open in front of you.
Yep.
Let's look up gun violence in Chicago.
Okay.
Because that'll give us actual shootings, numbers of shootings.
You want gun deaths?
Okay, yeah, gun deaths in Chicago. Because I think it's important to have some sense of proportion around this.
All right, I'll see if they have anything for 2018. Okay, here's what I found. This is 2018 numbers. The Chicago Police Department said 555 people have been murdered in the city as of December 23rd. The city saw 644 murders in 2017 and a staggering 781 a year earlier. And while 2018 saw far fewer murders than those years, the city is still outpacing the totals of 2014 and 15. So you've got anywhere from 500 to 700, almost 800 murders in that one city alone.
In Chicago alone.
That are usually black-on-black gang-related.
So the point I would make here is, it's easy to draw out those kinds of statistics, but when you're talking about, again, I don't know how they define extremist quote unquote shootings, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say that they have something that's really relevant, a really valid set of criteria to come up with that characterization. But when we talk about 50 out of the entire United States,
315 million people.
Okay, 350 million people in the United States.
315. That's the last number I saw.
Yeah, I think it's a little more now, but it's
okay.
But it's almost negligible. Now, here's the problem that I have. Okay, the problem that I have is with this notion of the rise of white nationalism. And so, when people are worried about, in the United States, we'll take the United States as an example, but we're hearing it here as well, the idea that if you want to have secure borders with a sensible immigration policy, that makes you a white nationalist. Okay? Yeah. Now, here's my question is, what happens if you're Thomas Sowell and you want to have, or Larry Elder, and you want to have a secure border? Does that make you a black white nationalist?
Don't give them any ideas.
Well, it's there's no common sense around it, and it becomes, it's not just a dog whistle. It becomes a situation where you completely invalidate and make worthless the whole notion of racism. When everything is racism, nothing is racism.
Exactly.
I guess would be the point I would make. But my goodness gracious, 50. I mean, I would be embarrassed by putting out a report like that.
Well, here's the other thing. I believe that this whole white nationalist, how evil that is, because you can put a slash and say supremacist next to it. First of all, there's nothing supreme about being white. More white men are in prison. More white men die or let me change that. More men. I don't want to color this. Men, and I guess what I'm saying is, you hear this patriarchal society. I want to make sure I get my names right, because it's common across all races. More men die in prison. More men are in prison. More men die in wars. More men get killed on the job. More men. There's nothing supreme about being a guy. And now they've taken this idea that, oh my God, if you want to wave your own flag, your Canadian flag or American flag, and stand at your border and say, unless I know who you are and why you want in, you're not coming. That paints you as some kind of white supremacist. And I think it's absolutely outrageous. There was a time in this country when everybody thought that way, and the country was far healthier, much lower crime rates. We had healthy immigration. I mean, we're not against, I am not against immigration. I'm not a white supremacist. Okay? I'm a nationalist. I don't care what color I am. It's like if you run into a guy who's Asian and he loves Canada. Well, he's a nationalist. He loves the country. Because in my worldview, Canada is unique among nations and should be celebrated as such. This post-nationalist mentality that Trudeau started a few years ago when he said, I'm the first post-national prime minister.
Yeah, he said that Canada was the first post-national state, which was patently false. I mean, it just gives you an idea of how little educated our people are, because people bought that. A lot of people bought that.
Yeah, well,
all you have to do is look at, let me think. Certainly Canada, well, they said Canada was the first post-national state, meaning that you have more than one nation in the state. But, I would argue that arguably the first post-national state was the United Kingdom, because there are,
How many
there were
countries
three.
Are in with the UK?
Well, there are four nations. There's the Irish, at least in Northern Ireland, the Scottish, the English, and the Welsh. So it's all in one state. Certainly, the old Soviet Union was a non-national state. There was no nation. But if you look at Yugoslavia, if you look at the history of many European states, okay, were in fact not nations. They were conglomerates of different nations that came together, whether by design or by accident or by force,
right?
Under one administrative entity, that one government.
Yeah, and there's plenty of examples of that. But Canada, when I say that Canada is unique, it wasn't born of fire. Unlike the American experience that had a revolution, a physical revolution with blood and all that stuff, we didn't do it that way. And I take great pride in that we were able to separate from the mother country in a peaceful manner.
More or less peaceful.
Yeah, hey, everything's relative, right?
Yeah, don't forget, we did have two.
Well, there was the Fenian raids. But the point I'm making is that compared to other countries, it's been relatively bloodless.
Agreed.
Okay, so when I look at Canada and I say this country has so much to offer, why would anyone want to tear it apart? We are looked up to, or at least were looked up to, by every other, and you can tell. You just look at who wants to come here. Like, how many people want to emigrate to Yemen, or to the UAE, or to Bangladesh, or to Libya? You don't see lineups going over there because it's such a great place. They all want to come here because it's one of the best places on the planet to live. And I think that when people stand up and take pride in that and hold our flag high and say, and we want to make sure it stays that way, we're now cast as some kind of vile monster that doesn't understand the global village. Well, I don't want to be part of the global village. I want to be Canadian. And if Canada deals with the rest of the countries in the world, that's great. We need to for trade and things like that. But I'm not willing to surrender our sovereignty just because we want to get along with the rest of the world. From that point of view, they can all jump in the lake.
Yeah, but I don't even think, Nick, that it's a matter of getting on with the rest of the world. I think that this is. I think that accusing people and finding villains in every corner and that, I think it's a bit of a fad. I think that there's a real victim mentality out there. There's a sense of anger. And, we've joked around about how we should have called our podcast Angry White Men.
Right.
But the truth is that it's not really the old white men that are angry. It's the young generation, and mostly the people who are, not old and white and men. So, that probably takes in everybody else. And they're all going to university, and they're all angry. I'm not angry. Well, I mean, I get a little frustrated maybe when I get accused of being something I'm not, as I think you do, and I think most people do quite reasonably.
There aren't many things that actually make me angry.
The real anger, the real boiling attitude, the sense of this world is going to the dogs and we have to do something to change it, or it's already been with the dogs, or it's a dog's world. The real dissatisfaction with the world the way it is, for better or worse, doesn't rest with older white men. Okay? It rests with everybody else, particularly the crowd that's in the universities these days. And You mentioned in the last segment, you touched on this sense of entitlement amongst students, okay? But really, that's where it is. You don't see angry white men protesting in the streets, okay? And if an angry white guy from time to time picks up a gun and shoots people, does that signify the rise of white nationalism? I mean, the number of times when that's happened, and again, I don't even know that this is the criteria that they've used when they came up with that number. But let me ask you this, okay? When was the last time that you saw an angry white heard of an angry white man, an older guy, going into a school and shooting up a school. It never. None of the school shootings that we're all exercised about over the last decade have been perpetrated by angry white men or by angry older white men.
I think they're saying that the one in Christchurch is that.
Okay,
but I don't know
but maybe it was.
Yet.
I'm not saying it never happens, Nick.
Right.
I'm saying that there's no trend.
Yeah, and that's part of what I completely agree with that, because most of us, first of all, if you're talking to people like you and I, we're just too damn old for that. You know, it just isn't. We like to think that there's debating is better than fighting. You know, we'll fight if we have to, but there's a lot of people out there.
And in your case, you think that drinking is better than fighting, but
yeah, well, there's times for everything under heaven, but drinking is one of them. But anyway, the point I'm making is that there is a lot of frustration out there, and there aren't many things that make me angry. I've got a pretty thick skin. There's a few. When people from the government trespass on my land without a warrant, that makes me angry. When people insult my country, when people attack my country, because like you, I wore the Queen's uniform, and I still hold that oath as valid today that we took to defend this country, up to and including with our lives if necessary. You know, so those things I've never forgotten. But outside of that, I get frustrated with people who don't understand or think they know me better than they do on Facebook or on Twitter or whatever it is. You know, you're this and you're that, you're horrible. Blah, blah, blah. Most of that I just ignore because it's based on nonsense. But I can understand why people tend to get angry. Now, does that automatically lead to shootings and violence? No, I don't think so. And I think this trend is manufactured because it provides a scapegoat.
But I think there is a trend, Nick. But the trend is not with angry white men. The trend is with younger, a more or less diverse crowd, typically university educated. These are the guys that riot in the streets when President Trump is elected,
yep.
Or when the G7 now or G8 at the time has its meetings in Toronto, and you know they're running around throwing rocks and sticks and bottles and Molotov cocktails at police and smashing shop windows. I mean, it's not angry white men are not the people who were with the yellow jacket protests in France. Okay, they're not protesting in the streets of London. It's younger people, people who like to think of themselves as being more open-minded, more diverse, and I'll give them that cohort is perhaps more ethnically and racially and ideologically, at least in terms of religion and all kinds of things, far more diverse than perhaps our generation was, but they're the ones that are angry. They're the ones that are they may not be pulling out guns and shooting people, but they're the ones that are violent. All those guys that were the Occupy Wall Street, remember the
yep.
crowd?
Yep.
That's a thing that sort of died off. You don't hear from them anymore. But these guys who were taking over public parks, they weren't angry old men. Well, angry white old men,
young university
they're
students.
young idealists, and they, they want to make their mark in the world. But they're the ones that are dissatisfied. They're the ones that want to bring about change, and they're the ones. Not all of them. Maybe it's not fair. Maybe it's just a small number of them. But if there's a trend towards violent behavior and violent language, that's where it emanates from. That's the cohort where the problem is. So I think there is a trend. I think there is a problem. But the problem isn't with us. The problem is with them.
Well, when you put it into context, when you look at the numbers, I just looked up the numbers for the murder rate in Toronto. They had more gun deaths in Toronto than they had based on white supremacy in the States. I think it was 64 or something like that. So even in Toronto, when you put things into context, and that's what's lacking in so many conversations is context. And you can pick the topic. Somebody will take a sentence. Like I got a poster on Facebook that does that all the time. He'll take a 20-second video clip and say, "See how horrible this is?" And it turns out that if he waited and showed the whole minute-and-a-half clip, it would have been in context, and it was not what he presented, how he presents it. And I'm not going to name him. I don't need to embarrass him again. It's just, anybody on my Facebook page will know who I'm talking about. But the bottom line is they get so wrapped up in the moment that they forget there were moments before and there will be moments after. They have no sense of timing or context. And that, I think, is a very dangerous thing. And we see it in universities where, what do we want? When do we want it? What do we want? When do we want it? Shutting down Peterson or getting rid of Brian Shapiro or not letting Ann Coulter speak or things like that. They don't want to hear this stuff, partly because they've been told that these guys are neo-whatevers and that it's hate speech, and they believe it. Their professors have convinced them. Well, then they go out, and the other reason they don't want to hear it is because it's too shattering to their worldview. They can't handle it.
Well, if I was a Freudian, and I'm not, but if I were a Freudian, sorry for my bad grammar there, if I were a Freudian, and I'm not, but if I were, I would call all of this a classic case of Freudian transference, where really subconsciously all of these people know that they're exhibiting this behavior, but rather than owning it, they transfer it onto other people and criticize them for the behavior that they themselves subconsciously know that they have.
Here's another angle in the last few minutes here before we head off. There was a situation here in the nation's capital, for those of you not listening in Ottawa itself, where some guy went ripping down by Ottawa University, bouncing off everything in sight, damaging some cars, and he was driving a stolen van, and just, the guy was just a complete train wreck. And one of the people who's witnessed it called into the local radio station and was describing it, and she said, "Oh, it's such a traumatic experience. My heart's going like a hammer." And the host is saying, "Okay, calm down, slow down. Tell me, do you remember anything? Do you think of it?" And she was so flustered. Now, here's the remarkable part. First of all, was anybody hurt? No. Were you, was your vehicle destroyed? No. So it didn't impact you directly other than you watched the event happen? No. So why are you so flustered? I mean, think about it. 70 years ago, people her age were storming the beaches of D-Day. And they were flustered, but they did it anyway. They were terrified, but they did it anyway. And now we've got marshmallows and snowflakes who can't handle watching a demolition derby on Main Street. What happens if it's a real scenario? Like the Twin Towers.
That's when you call in the alleged caring professions.
Oh, yes. Oh, grief. Oh,
the grief counselors.
Grief counselors. You had to bring them up. What kind of muffins have we turned into where we can't even handle? There were 2 dogs shot in the city over the last 48 hours, and you would think somebody had gone on a mass shooting spree. Look, first of all, it never should have made the news. They're dogs. They attacked police officers, and they defended themselves.
And they weren't even angry or white.
That's right. So get over it.
Well, they probably were angry.
Well, yeah, they were probably angry, very angry.
Yeah.
Okay, but the point is, they're dogs. They're not human beings. They didn't eat kittens. Well, maybe the dogs did, but the cops didn't. They injured one and killed the other. They disposed of a threat to the public safety. That's their job. So why is everybody so worked up about this? And it just drives me crazy that there is no internal fortitude to be able to deal with life's challenges, no imagined or real. People just come apart at the seams. Anyway.
I know, Nick. I know.
One of my pet peeves is how soft people are.
Is how soft people are. Oh dear, who has more fun than us? That's what I want to know. Who has more fun?
Nobody but me.
Than us. I'm just looking at a few things here. What else do we have to do? I'm not entirely sure. I'm not even sure what I'm doing here. So how is the chat room working out there tonight so far there, Nick?
It seems you're working okay. There's a bunch of people making comments. Looks like R2D2 had a problem with some of his posting.
I think that R2D2 might actually be,
messing with us?
No, I think that R2D2 might actually be Marin.
No, I know who it is.
Oh, how come R2D2's not posting? R2D2, post some stuff on our chat room, man.
Yeah, give us the plans for the Death Star.
You got them. Star. Oh, my goodness gracious.
Yeah, half the people, and I'll bet you people under 30 don't know what I'm talking about. Well, they might if they watch the original. Anyway.
I'm just doing a couple of small housekeeping things here.
While you do that, I'll kind of queue up. We're at the bottom of the hour, so we're going to have to take a break real fast. When we come back, we're going to talk. We have a couple more topics I want to get into, or we want to get into. One is called the death of common sense. Maybe we'll come back with that. And the OSPCA. Oh boy, have we got to talk about that? So you guys stay right there. When we get back, we'll have more on the Combat Zone. Last half hour coming right at you. Welcome back to the Combat Zone, folks. He's Joseph, I'm Nick, and we've got another half hour straight ahead. But before we get into any more topics, we have a telephone call from... I can't see the screen.
Robert.
You can't see the screen.
No, he's got to see... I'm sitting here watching the chat room and Facebook, and he's sitting over there monitoring the phone calls. So I can't see who's on.
Hey, Robert, how's it going tonight?
Well, it's going good, but having trouble on your Think Radio chat room. The comments keeps getting removed, some of them, and it's on my question, and then I see some weird comments, like one says hi with lots of D's and E's. It's weird.
You're not holding the key down too long, are you?
God, that's...
Pardon me?
You're not holding the I button down too long, are you?
No, I'm not.
Okay. I just hey, listen.
That wasn't even a serious question,
no,
Robert.
Really.
Listen. I appreciate the feedback because this is the first time that we've used this chat room, and it's obviously that there's some glitches in it, so we may just revert back to the old chat room. I don't know. We'll have to discuss it, but what do you have to say about some of the topics we've been talking about there, Robert? You think we should have...
Well, one of my questions...
Go ahead.
One of my questions that I was asking on the chat room is for the dirty water in remote Aboriginal communities. Why is it contaminated? They're in remote areas.
I would guess, and I don't know this for a fact, but it has to do with their sewage treatment and where they're putting it, and it's contaminating the river.
So they're putting it in the river and taking their drinking water from the bottom?
Well, no, downstream and upstream. But see, don't forget, a river in the wilderness, even if there's no humans around, has nasty bacteria in it because there's beavers that use it, there's deer that use it, there's moose that use it, there's fish that use it, and they all use it for the same thing, for a toilet. So to scoop...
I was a scout leader for 25 years, and I used a lot of rivers and wilderness, and I knew how to decontaminate it by just having a little bit of bleach or these Alzone tablets. So how come these guys can't do the same thing?
Well, you're not. It's a good question, Robert. I think that the point that we were making, it's not so much that as we aren't addressing those problems when they come up, but we're spending tens and hundreds of millions of dollars overseas on trying to combat climate change in countries that we're not going to have any effect. And in any event, who cares? Climate change is not a man-made thing. So that's really the point. I don't, I'm not an engineer. I'm not on the site. Even if I was even not being an engineer, if I was on site and I saw what was going on, I might be able to figure it out. But the point is that that nobody, whatever the cause is, we're more concerned about global warming in Africa, it seems, than we care about the environment here. And when we talk about boil water warnings in Aboriginal communities, remote communities, look, all we have to do is right here in Ottawa. Forget about boil water. I mean, the fact is that we've been dumping tons of raw sewage on an ongoing basis into the Ottawa River.
Every time it rains.
Now, is that a good thing, or is it a bad thing, or is it a neutral thing? I don't know.
But why don't they install, like in small communities, regular communities, not Aboriginal, they install small water treatment plants, that are not that expensive. Instead of wasting all that money supporting the rest of the planet, why don't they put these small water treatment plants in those Aboriginal communities? I don't get it. They waste billions of dollars giving it to other countries, and when it comes to Canada, forget it.
Well, you're hitting the nail on the head. That is exactly the point that Nick and I were both making. That money should be spent here, and it should be spent instead of trying to figure out how to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. It should be spent on making sure that Canadians have clean water, clean air, and clean land. That should be the environmental policy we follow. That's the environmental policy that the Conservatives should be talking about. And forget about all of these, hocus-pocus, claptrap ideas about saving the planet. Well, I'm not interested in saving the planet. My father always said this, okay? If everybody would just look after their own business properly and responsibly, then the world would be fine. You stop trying to save the world and look after your own responsibilities. And if everybody just did that, then the world will take care of itself.
And just
when you're talking about that. When you're talking about climate change, you're preaching to the choir here. I know about was it Tom Harris and Dr. Tim Ball and what's the guy that founded Greenpeace, and he's talking against it now. I've listened to all these people, and I totally agree with them. I've agreed with them since day one.
Well, we had we had Tom Harris on a couple of months ago, and he was in here for an hour and taking part in the show. So it's about time we get Tom back in, actually.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah, and if you could try to get Dr. Tim Ball also, that would be great.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion.
I have interviewed him before many years ago. I doubt he'd ever remember it. He's done like thousands of interviews, but he was a great interviewer. He was very smart, knows his stuff, and it would be worthwhile having him on if we can get it.
So Robert, then, so we could put you down as a no to the current chat room, correct?
Right now, it's having issues.
Okay, all right, that's great.
Okay, another topic about the Liberal mess right now. Maybe we don't have to vote them out in in October. Maybe they're all quit before then.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Well, the way it's going right now, they're quitting one after. They're dropping like flies. We're up to 5 now. One every day would be nice.
One every day, yeah. Well, but yeah.
Give us another 20 days, and the Tories have a majority.
The what?
I said, give us another 20 days, and the Tories have the majority.
Yeah, and then they can call a non-confident vote and call an early election.
Well,
that's an interesting idea, but I don't have the numbers in front of me. But obviously, quite a few Liberals still have to.
You would have to have an open revolt
to fall down, but I don't see it in the cards. But it's an interesting idea, Robert, for sure.
I think what you probably see is a tossing of Justin Trudeau as leader rather than everybody abandoning the Liberal flag. I just don't see that happen.
Just be careful what you wish for. You might just get it.
That's a very good axiom.
Well, there's a lot of TV commentators right now. They're saying that it doesn't look that rosy in the Liberal caucus. They're throwing the wrong image, and a lot of journalists are seeing right through their fakery.
No, that's good. It's about time the journalism in this country woke up. All right, Robert, listen, thank you very much for the call. We're going to let you go because we do have a couple more topics we want to get to. So thank you very much. Please feel free to call again. All right.
Okay, what's going on now?
Well, I'm going to bring up another topic. That's what I'm going to do.
Oh, right. Okay.
Okay. Now, if you remember a few weeks ago, there was the issue of the Boeing 737 MAX 8 fleet being grounded after that accident or that tragedy in Ethiopia.
Yes.
Okay. That caused a ripple effect that went around the world, obviously. They grounded all the aircraft, and these are not in insignificant numbers. I think Air Canada alone flies about 24 of these things. And they said it took a little while for the Liberal government to ground them, and I don't know what they were waiting for. If safety is your number one priority, then put them on the ground until you figure out what's going on. However, if I had to give this a title, I'd call it The Death of Common Sense. There was a case with one of the passengers, because everybody's saying, oh, man, they ought to put us up, they ought to do this, they ought to do that, food vouchers, hotels, all that stuff. It's not our fault. Well, guess what? It wasn't the airline's fault either. So in this case, somebody was flying WestJet. They were out in Burnaby, and they had to fly someplace east. Obviously, let's say it was just to pick a city, Montreal, they were flying to. So there was an adult and 4 teenagers. So 4 adult fares flying on WestJet from Burnaby to Montreal. That's not cheap. Now, he could have, and I did look this up. I did the research at the time. They do have a refund policy. That they will refund you any unused part of your ticket, okay, when situations like this happen. So he could have very easily been looking at about $3,000 to $4,000 given on the class and, a bunch of modifiers that go in there. But let's say it was $3,000 in his pocket. Now, one of the kids had gotten a flight out of Calgary the next day. Now, I myself have rented a car and driven from Banff to Calgary. It's less than a day's drive. It's a gorgeous drive, but they had his wife on and him on, and they were outraged that Air Canada or WestJet didn't offer them accommodation, didn't offer them food vouchers, didn't provide for them ground transport, all that stuff. And I thought to myself, cash in your ticket, rent a car, and drive to Calgary. Put the kid on the airplane, and if there's room, get on with him. If there's not, you could even drive the rest of the way from Calgary to wherever you're going in a couple of days, 3 or 4 days. In other words, don't look for somebody else to solve your problem. It's your problem. Deal with it. Be an adult. Make whatever decision you need to make. You've got more than enough money, because they're saying, well, what if he didn't have any more money? He's got tickets worth $3,000 or $4,000. Take that money and use it. That's you paid for the tickets. Take the cash back, get in a rental car, and drive to Calgary. If you can't find ground transport out of Calgary, go to Winnipeg. If you can't find it out of there, just keep going till you get home. Take a train, for crying out loud. Make it an adventure. It doesn't have to be the end of the world. And this is the kind of common sense, and this kind of fits in with my marshmallow mentality from the previous hour, where we have a situation where people have forgotten how to take care of themselves. It's like feeding deer in the bush. It's a dumb idea because then they forget how to feed themselves. Mankind is the same way. You take away what's necessary for them to survive and you provide it for them, they forget how to do it for themselves and become wholly dependent on somebody else. And that's what was driving me crazy about the whole thing. That this is so easy to solve. Car rental, rent a van, get in it, drive. It ain't that far.
That's interesting that you're raising this topic because my wife was recently traveling to New York from Ottawa, and she was flying WestJet, and they had problems with the airline, with the plane, and also with the weather. It was in the middle of this in February when we had a couple of heavy snowstorms. Anyway, the long and the short of it was she was supposed to fly from Ottawa to Toronto, transfer planes to Toronto, and then fly from Toronto to New York City.
Right. And
the whole trip should have taken about 4 or 5 hours with the layover in Toronto.
Right.
But the actually, as it happened, was it took her 30 hours to get to New York.
Right.
Because the flight was, first of all, the flight was delayed for several hours in Ottawa because of the weather.
Right.
And then when it finally took off, they had a problem with the plane.
Right.
And had to turn around and come back.
Right.
They landed, and then they spent another hour or so in Ottawa, and then boarded the same plane after they fixed whatever the mechanical problem was. Ended up going to Toronto, but they arrived in Toronto after midnight and well after the flight from Toronto to New York had already departed. There were no flights anymore, and so she had to stay in a hotel overnight.
Right. So
she stayed in the hotel overnight, and then she took a taxi to the hotel, took a taxi from the hotel to the airport the next day. And while she was at the airport, they worked out a flight for her from Toronto to New York the next day in the afternoon. So that's what she did. The whole thing ended up costing her out of her pocket. Had to pay for the hotel, had to pay for the taxi rides, had to pay for meals, so. She was out of pocket a few $100s anyway, probably $300-400 thereabouts. So when after she had come home, she called WestJet. She talked to them, and they said, "Well, send us copies of your receipts, and we're going to reimburse you." And that's what actually ended up happening. They reimbursed her for her added expenses. But the point is this, okay? You have to take matters into your own hands. You have to deal with the situation, and that's what she did. And WestJet, I have to say, was more than fair. And they weren't even responsible for some of the issues that had gone on. How is WestJet responsible for the weather? But it didn't matter because the weather was the primary cause of this problem, but it didn't matter. They were very good. They didn't haggle with her. They just said, "Look, we understand. Send us your receipts, and we'll reimburse you." And that's what they did. They reimbursed her for the whole amount. Now, I once had a situation with Ward Air. I don't know if you remember Ward Air.
Vaguely.
But Ward Air used to Max Ward was the owner there, and I had a problem. Wasn't with the airline, but I had booked a trip, a diving expedition. I joined a diving expedition down in the Dominican Republic. I know people are going, "Oh, that's a holiday spot." It wasn't so much of a holiday spot when I went down. This was back in the 80s, early 80s, mid 80s or thereabouts. Anyway, so I went down and I booked a villa. A bunch of us booked different villas. I did it through Ward Air, and went down there. And the villa that I was in, when I say a villa, I mean it was a cabin, but it was one bedroom and a bathroom and a little sitting area. Okay, so whatever you want to call this. So it was very nice. It was beautiful, and but there was still running water, and it was a problem. So and I was there for a week in the place, but I was only in the villa for a couple of days because I go down and complain. I complained that there was no water. The toilets weren't flushing. There was no. And the guy would go, "Well, mañana." Yeah, I go, "No agua." They go, "Mañana." So
that means tomorrow.
Yeah, mañana is tomorrow. I'd go, "No agua, no water." Okay, and they go, "Yeah, tomorrow. And that went on for a couple of days. And so finally I said, "Look, I need other accommodation." So they moved me somewhere else, and everything went fine. And I flew back, and back in Canada, I go, I'm going to write to these guys, Ward Air. I wrote to them. I said, "Look, I booked these facilities through you guys, and I'm not. It's not even a complaint. I just want you to know of what happened when I was down there, because it's your reputation's on the line as well.
Right.
I didn't expect anything, but a few weeks later, I get a letter from Max Ward, and I don't know if it was actually Max or it was but the owner of the airline, right? And what's in it? A letter of apology, a check for 50% of the cost of the entire trip.
Wow.
That was airfare, which I had no problem with.
Right.
And the accommodations, okay. And a travel voucher for the other 50%.
Boy, you can't beat that with a stick.
So I guess, this is we started out complaining about people complaining. And how we're wrapping up this discussion, we still have a few minutes left in the show tonight, but it's a good news story. The good news here is that the big bad corporations, there are a lot of them that really do care, and they want to help people out. And so, but don't ask them to fix your problem at the front end. Go to them afterwards. Excuse me, my coughing, guys, but what are you going to do? You're going to sit in the airport for 3 or 4 or 5 days waiting for them to solve the problem for you? Solve your own problem. Yeah, and then talk to them, and you'll find that in many cases they're very accommodating. They want to help you out.
Well, I think that's that pretty much is true for any situation. Number one, deal with this situation as it's presented to you. Play the cards that you're dealt. Again, going back to this couple who had these 4 teenagers on the flight along with an adult. Just deal with it. Never mind how inconvenient it is. And yes, it's inconvenient. I get that. Nobody wants to be delayed. If you're on a vacation to Hawaii and you want to get there, you've only got 10 days, spending 2 of them in Vancouver because the weather's bad or the airplane's down or whatever, that kind of sucks. All right, but it's not the end of the world. The sun will come up tomorrow morning. There just seems to be this lack of resiliency. All right, we could probably finish the show on that, but there's one more topic I want to get to because I think it's really important. If you remember, for those of you listening out there in Ontario land and other jurisdictions, the OSPCA, the Ontario Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, had its fangs pulled. It was an organization that had been given police-like powers, was dependent on donations, and was also able to fine and seize private property. In other words, other people's animals. One of the most famous cases was here not far from the city of Ottawa, where there was a woman who had a small little corgi kind of dog or some Shih Tzu or something like that, a little dog that she was using for breeding, and she was asleep on the couch. Well, she didn't hear them knocking at the door. Apparently somebody had complained that this dog was in some kind of peril. So because she didn't answer, they crawled through her bathroom window and came in and woke her up and then seized her. They looked the dog over and said, well, this dog needs a dentist because it's got plaque on its teeth.
Did gingivitis, this was the troubling case of gingivitis. The dog had gingivitis. So
that's the kind of power that they had. They've seized whole herds of horses on Manitoulin Island. I mean, the list of things that they got away with and charged people ruined careers, ruined lives, had animals destroyed that had no business being destroyed. Goes on. There's a recent one out of southern Ontario, where a cow was put down by someone who had no business being on the farm in the first place. There was no warrant, no due process. Turns out the guy was not allowed to have firearms, and he coerced and browbeat this poor farmer. And when I say poor, I don't mean financially. He was a Mormon. They're peaceful. They don't resist. So they walked in and shot his pregnant cow because they thought it might have Johne's disease. Okay, so it goes on and on and on like this. But in the next 10 days, the Ontario government is going to rewrite the Animal Protections Act.
Right, or at least they're saying that that's the target date. They want to have it done by the end of the month. Right.
According to my sources, they want it done in 10 days. They want to get it done fast.
Right.
So this isn't going to be September before this gets done. They'll have it done long by then. But they'll listen to, they have on their people who have vested, I hate this term, stakeholders, because it just means anybody who's got an interest in the topic, an animal rights group whose lawyer, when asked if she was a vegan, said lawyers don't eat their clients. Okay, now I agree with you. We talked about this before. I don't know that they're actually going to go that far, because the animal group wants animals assigned sentient status, which means that all of your animal farming would die. No chickens, no pigs, no cows, none of that stuff, all gone, because you would not then be able to imprison or use an animal for food. And this is so the Ontario Landowner Association wants and needs your help to go out and make sure they get standing at this council as well, because they've got some common sense solutions to this that they would like to see implemented. And if they only hear from one voice, the temptation to follow that voice is going to be pretty strong.
So what's the website, Nick?
It's OntarioLandowners.ca, I think. I'll just check it real fast.
So Nick's just checking the thing. And listen, for those of you out there who have livestock or whatever, it's not just and it's not just farmers. Frankly, if you're a pet owner as well, while Nick is just looking up the information, I think it's really important that you understand that you have rights, and these guys don't. So, you have to, if somebody comes knocking on your door and says, we want to check out your animals or your pets, tell them, no, well, come back with a warrant. And don't let them in. Don't just let them in the door. Don't be rude. Don't be belligerent. Don't be confrontational. Just say, yeah, you're welcome to come in and check my premises out with a warrant.
Well, you can also
simple as that. But in the meantime, the Ontario Landowners Association, great organization. They do wonderful things. They challenged the constitutionality in court of the OSPCA Act in Ontario and won. Now, the Ontario government, my understanding is appealing the decision, but they need your help to move this forward. So what's the website, Nick?
It is Ontario. OntarioLandowners.ca.
Okay, so OntarioLandowners.ca.
Yes.
So go to that. Go to the website. Get involved, and even if you don't want to become an activist, you don't want to join the organization, send them a donation. Get in touch with them. It's not tax deductible, but it's still very important.
Remember this: when one of us loses a right, we all do.
Absolutely. So
with that, I guess we're going to have to wrap it up. I would have loved to dedicate more time to this, but get out there and help your fellow Ontarian or your fellow citizen defend his rights, because this guy didn't see it coming, got blindsided, and had a healthy pregnant cow put down just because somebody else didn't agree with his opinion, and he had no basis to make that claim, and he had no authority to actually do it.
Okay, well, it has been a blast, and I guess that's the end of the show tonight, Nick.
It is. So,
all right, so don't forget, tell everybody about the combatzone.ca, the Combat Zone podcast website, combatzone.ca, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right. Good night, all.